Welcome to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast. We believe life is about how we react. Welcome to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast. This is a special episode that we recorded with our friends at the Jett Foundation in celebration of World Duchenne Awareness Day. We had the opportunity to speak with individuals in the Duchenne muscular dystrophy community about the challenges of accessing medical care. DMD causes progressive muscle damage in the entire body, and it's the most common fatal pediatric disorder. The Duchenne gene is found on the X chromosome. Therefore, it affects mostly males. But as we'll hear today, female carriers are also affected. Typically, children with Duchenne are born seemingly healthy and decline over time, typically losing their ability to walk around the age of 12 and succumbing to the disease in their early to mid-20s. There are approximately 15,000 patients diagnosed with Duchenne alive in the U.S. today. Duchenne has no cure. The mission at the Jett Foundation is to extend and enrich the lives of individuals affected by Duchenne muscular dystrophy and other neuromuscular disorders. Jett Foundation empowers people and families impacted by DMD through the development of transformational programming, educational opportunities such as this one, and ongoing support for every stage of the Duchenne journey. As you'll hear, our panel featured patients, caregivers, and medical professionals who share their valuable experience to help others in the DMD community. Enjoy our conversation with Anthony, Naz, Jake, Ken, Mark, and Trina.
Hi, everybody. My name is Alexa Tinsley, and I am the Director of Programs here at Jett Foundation. Thank you all for joining us today and helping us raise awareness with our educational panel. Today, we are focusing on breaking barriers, which is the theme of the World Duchenne Organization's World Duchenne Awareness Day this year, and we are focusing on access to care. We're so honored that you've decided to be with us today and be part of our event. There are 6 individuals here sharing their experiences with us. And with that, I would love to introduce you to our 2 moderators, Kyle and Sean with the Two Disabled Dudes. We are so happy to have them back. I will hand it off to you.
Thanks, Alexa. For me on the West Coast, good morning. And for many of you, good afternoon. We are honored to be a part of the Jett Foundation event. Again, we all know there are gaps in all systems. Healthcare and access to it are not exempt. So we're going to get into a lot of that today.
For the rare disease patient, accessing medical care is not straightforward. The challenges may be physical, emotional, societal, financial, systemic. There are so many challenges, but we know how strong the Duchenne community is and how strong the rare disease community is. We know that connecting with each other and learning from each other's experiences is the best way to face these challenges. And there's a lot of knowledge and experience in the Duchenne community, and we're excited to have this conversation today to shed some light on some of that knowledge with these awesome panelists. So we're going to have them introduce themselves. I'm going to start with Anthony.
Hello, I'm Anthony DiRogello. I live in New Jersey. I'm 30 years old, and I consider myself like a disability and rare disease and accessibility advocate. I gotta say, I attribute a lot of that to becoming independent through attending Camp Promise and Jett Foundation. So I just love technology. I love communicating. And like this talk is about, I often find a lot of barriers and gaps. And one of my goals in life is to help fill those gaps and build those bridges. So I'm happy to be here.
Hi, my name is Trina Staley. I live in South Louisiana. I am a mom of a son who had Duchenne and a daughter who is a manifesting carrier. I am also a manifesting carrier and a resource specialist for the Jett Foundation, and I specialize in females in Duchenne. So that is my passion. And I'm excited to be here today and discuss barriers in Duchenne.
Hey, my name's Mark Schmertman. I'm a social worker with Team Joseph. Official title is Director of Programs and Family Support. My social work background started actually at camp, Serious Fun Network camp. That kind of pushed me into social work school, had experience in the clinical setting with hemophilia, and then I used that to move on to a neuromuscular clinic, and I was the social worker at Cincinnati Children's Neuromuscular Clinic for 4 years before moving to Team Joseph, and happy to be here.
Hi, I'm Ken Navarra, and this is my son, Jake, who is 31 with Duchenne's. We live in Massachusetts. We're about 30 miles south of Boston and kind of close to Cape Cod, so we kind of get the picture. Like I say, Jake is so much, I think, a lot like Anthony with the technology. Jake is very, very in tune with all the technology. He's got all of us with smartphones and the latest and greatest in technology. And I would say, he's been such a blessing. This whole thing has been quite a journey. We are fortunate that we live close to Boston, so we have access to pretty good medical care. And I leave it at that for now.
I'm Naz Daskier. I currently work at Regenix Bio. I'm the clinical development lead on the RGX-202 program, which is a gene therapy being developed for Duchenne muscular dystrophy. But the side note and how I got involved with this panel is because I still practice as a neuromuscular physician, but I've kind of cut down my hours because I have now 2 jobs. But in that practice, because I have a colleague taking care of my younger pediatric patients, I really wanted to focus on my aging patients and kind of get through that process with them, and have noticed a lot of lapses in the continuity of care between going from childhood neuromuscular care to adulthood neuromuscular care, especially in multidisciplinary clinics. So this has become a newfound passion of mine that I've known has always existed, but it's a passion to try to figure out how to make this as seamless as possible and as efficient as possible. So thanks for having me.
Trina, can you tell us exactly what it means when we say manifesting carrier?
So a manifesting carrier is a female that has signs and symptoms of Duchenne. It's a spectrum, just like boys and young men with Duchenne. Some carriers are not affected at all. Some carriers may have heart issues, and some carriers have severe issues. Some of them can be very severe. And there's some that are kind of in the middle. They may have cardiac issues, they may have some muscle weakness, or they may have issues with their lungs, everything on a systemic level. So I'm here to try to raise awareness about the different levels that carriers can be affected and go from there.
Trina, can you tell us what are, and maybe even Naz can jump in here, but what are some of the common misnomers, if you will, in female carriers of Duchenne? I'll admit, I always thought, no, just guys, it's just a dude's problem. Obviously, I'm wrong. Can you help us understand what are some of the common nuances that you guys are up against when it comes to helping educate the community?
The most common misconception is that females are just carriers, meaning, that they only have one copy of the gene and they wouldn't be affected. And we were told that when my son was first diagnosed. They're like, we may have you checked to be a carrier, but you're not going to run into any issues. And if you do, you may have some heart problems as you get older. And that just simply wasn't the case. And as the years went on, I started noticing different signs and symptoms. And my daughter was diagnosed when she was only 5 years old. And I'm like, well, hold on, you told me this wasn't possible. And through social media, we found there were so many other women that were affected with this. And it's not rare like people think.
Yeah, I could comment on that too, just from like a physician perspective. The way this works is because Duchenne is an X-linked disorder, it means that it's primarily carried on an X chromosome. And if you have one X chromosome that's affected and another one that's unaffected, you're basically just a carrier. But with males, it's typically one X and one Y. So if the one X that you have carries the mutation, then you'll manifest with Duchenne. The unique part about manifesting carrier females who have Duchenne is that there is this a phenomenon that can happen that actually one of your X's can become partially inactivated. And usually that is the case, that there's some level of inactivation that goes on, but it depends on the severity with which it's inactivated and which chromosome is inactivated. So if your unaffected X is inactivated and your affected X is activated, then you can become a manifesting carrier. And I've had patients that have, sometimes cramping, elevated CKs, who are my young female patients, to being clear Becker phenotypes, Becker presenters, or even looking like full-blown Duchenne muscular dystrophy following that same trajectory. And it often does correlate with how much the 1X is inactivated.
Much appreciated. That starts our baseline for understanding. There's another topic that we want to talk about too that I think requires a little baseline for understanding as well, and that's the transition from pediatric care to adult care. We know that can be difficult sometimes. Lots of stuff changes. And so to understand that, I want to ask Jake and Ken, what are some of the biggest challenges when it comes to transitioning from pediatric care to adult care?
I think trying to find the physicians that are aware of what it does to your body. I know a lot of doctors know what Duchenne's is, but specifically like heart function, lung function, and that type of thing. We've been very lucky here that when Jake was first diagnosed at 18 months, his doctor stayed with him. He stayed with us for like 27 years. And he directed us, by his knowledge, to some other really good physicians at Tufts Medical Center in Boston. And we have been very fortunate at the local level here at our hospital that we have a pulmonologist. Heart and lungs are so crucial. And that transition to get into a good pulmonology group, we have a doctor here that has been phenomenal, that has understood. He has reached out to doctors in Boston. So if he can't answer the question, he has go-to people in Boston that he communicates with. And that is a huge thing. So if you have your regular doctors who can reach out to the top guns and wherever you're located to bridge those gaps, that's a huge, huge thing. And to not be afraid, if you hear anything, to reach right out, even if it's a doctor that you haven't heard of before. If you hear something on a podcast or you hear something, don't ever be afraid to reach out to that doctor. I know that all the physicians that I have reached out to have been very good at responding back to me. I was a carpenter at a hospital, so I worked in healthcare for 44 years. Even though I'm not a doctor or anything, but when you hang out in a hospital for 44 years, you learn a lot about different illnesses and things. So I think that helped a lot. And we're just very blessed because Boston is really the mecca of medical care, I think, with Mass General and Tufts. And Jake has recently got involved with a doctor at Worcester who has taken him on. She primarily does children, but she doesn't say no to anybody with Duchenne's. And her name is Dr. Brenda Wong. She has people fly in from around the world to meet with her, and she's just absolutely phenomenal. When we go to Dr. Wong, it's a full day appointment. It's nutrition, it's PT, it's OT, it's everything, blood work, the whole thing. She's the total package. So we've been very lucky that way.
If you're not near a good place like that, it's very difficult to find the right doctors.
Yeah.
So that's a big challenge.
In Boston for us is 30 miles away. Worcester is about 40 miles away. So, hearing, like Trina's situation and what she's gone through, I have a lot of respect for Trina and what she's in Louisiana. People in different parts of the country that don't have access to stuff. It's key. It's really key.
I have a lot of respect for anybody that lives in Louisiana as well. Trina, can you talk to us a little bit about the barriers you're up against, not just because you're a female or a manifesting carrier, but also because you're a little more isolated, geographically speaking. Obviously, we know the pandemic opened up a lot of opportunity for virtual visits, which we'll get more into in just a few minutes. But what are some of the things you have to consider when you're trying to get some medical care for you or even your daughter?
There's a lot. And like you said, being in Louisiana and not having access to, these certified Duchenne clinics is really difficult. And we ran into that when my son was first diagnosed, because we tried to bring him to, I'm going to say it's our local hospital because it was still 3 hours away, but that's where the MDA clinic was at the time. And they just didn't have the information. They didn't have the capabilities to be able to care for him. So after researching, we found Dr. Brenda Wong when she was at Cincinnati Children's Hospital.
Wow.
Cincinnati Children's Hospital was 14 hours away, but we did it because that's where he needed to get care. So it started out when he was little, we would just go to Cincinnati once a year. And then as he got older, we were going twice a year. And then as he started having complications, sometimes we were going to Cincinnati every 3 months. That's a difficult journey. And then as he got older, we had all his equipment and service dogs, and it was just me going with him to the hospital. And then it became even more difficult, and COVID kind of affected that. But the same thing with my daughter. When she was first diagnosed, we were going to Cincinnati Children's Hospital. We try to schedule their appointments together. As she's gotten older and we haven't been back to Cincinnati since COVID, really, we were able to find her a pretty decent cardiologist in our area, but the neuromuscular clinic is lacking. And then for me, it's been extremely difficult for me because I'm an adult. So we were able to find more doctors that were willing to help, girls manifesting at a younger age than I'm an adult. And they were like, well, maybe you're just tired or you're having some of these symptoms because you're a caregiver. And no one was really paying attention to me. And then I started participating in research trials, and I got MRIs done. And I'm like, this MRI is showing that I am affected. Now, where do I go from care? There was really no care for females. Wow. And then they started the clinic in Pennsylvania at UPenn, and they're one of the first carrier clinics that specialize. They're a multidisciplinary clinic, and they specialize in females. So I have been going to UPenn since last year, but that's difficult because Pennsylvania is not anywhere near Louisiana as well. But I think they started doing a virtual option. So if someone else if they're geographically challenged and you need to try to get in with a doctor somewhere far away and you're unable to make that trip, they are starting to offer virtual appointments. So that is making a huge difference. And that is one barrier that is being broken.
Yeah, it's huge. It's definitely worth celebrating too. And like I said, I think COVID sort of opened Pandora's box for all of us in that regard. Anthony, can you talk a little bit about what virtual visits have done and meant for you?
Yeah, so being homebound with my disability, I probably get out of my house maybe once every 2-3 months because it's just a struggle to get out of the house and to bring all the stuff I need for my feeding tube and everything else. So I think during the pandemic, virtual visits were definitely a blessing because I could be at home where I'm comfortable and where I have the care I need. And I can be on Zoom and sharing my symptoms or what's going on. And a lot of the times, my doctor visits would just be checking over a test or checking over results or just a checkup that didn't really need me going into the office or going into the healthcare location. So that was really great. But I think some of the things that kind of scare me about virtual visits now is recently one of my doctors had asked if I could start switching over to in-person visits, because a lot of doctors and insurance are starting to switch back to in-person. So thankfully, I was able to let them know that I'm homebound and it's really too difficult for me to get out of the house, so they were able to let me keep the visits. But I don't know, I feel like there's a shift coming to virtual visits, and I'm worried that insurance might say, like, okay, we're limiting the number of virtual visits or getting rid of them completely. So that's kind of my worry.
Nas, can you shed a little light on that subject as a physician, the transition that insurance companies might be making and the value to the patient for virtual visits?
Yeah, so I personally, as a neuromuscular physician, find virtual visits to be very nice. I enjoy making the visit convenient for the patient, and I think I can do, especially for folks like Anthony, who I might have known for a very long time, and I kind of know what he's like. I think it makes life easier for him. And I like the idea of not having to inconvenience him to come into the clinic, because a lot of what we're going to do is like talking, coordinating of care. Some of our young adults are on exon skipping therapy, and obviously they have to get reauthorized to get that. And that kind of process can be easily done virtually. Ideally, I would like to put my hands on someone once a year just to kind of check and make sure I'm not missing anything physically. That would be the ideal situation. But this is from a neurologist standpoint, right? So there's multidisciplinary care involved. From a pulmonologist standpoint, that might be different, right? Because you want to do some pulmonary function testing, or you might need to do a sleep study. And for a cardiologist, you might want to do a cardiac MRI or an echocardiogram. And unfortunately, that can't be done virtually. And if you have a really great multidisciplinary clinic where all of that could be coordinated on a single day, but even coordinating all of that on a single day might be very taxing, because it could take 5 hours, for example, to go through all those visits and tests and whatnot. Obviously, I think the one specialty you could cut down on and keep virtual is the neurologist in some ways, if you're seeing the pulmonologist, the cardiologist. So that's my perspective as a physician. From an insurance standpoint, I don't have like the full details on the ins and outs of how the process is going, but my sense is that the reimbursement for the virtual visits is probably going down. So the recommendation is to bring patients in so you can actually get paid as a physician group. This is obviously not a profit coming directly to the physician. You work for an institution, so you would probably get paid better if you had the in-person visit. But I think for the convenience of the families, it would be really nice to do this. And like I said myself, like I like to follow my patients every 4 to 6 months. I could easily just see them in person once a year and make that work. And kind of, even if there's like a one-off visit, like they want to chat about something, that would be super easy to do virtually. So I'm a big proponent, but obviously you're at the mercy of reimbursement and keeping the ship sailing in some ways in terms of like the money that's coming into the clinic and whatnot.
Yeah, in a previous conversation, you talked about a couple of tips or just about how to make the process smoother. Like if you're in better communication with the schedulers and the coordinators, then you might be able to more easily, without fighting, get those virtual visits. Can you talk a little about the atmosphere and the communication?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think everybody varies on the level of communication that they're comfortable having directly with their patients. And it's probably best to have all the communication through the computer system, so it's all documented so you don't lose track of the conversations that you've had. But my chart, for example, works out really well. So you could communicate directly with your physician. But even when you do that, there's often an office staff that filters through those messages, and you might not even get a direct response from your physician. So usually if you have a bigger clinic, and I'm not saying that everybody needs to do this, like I have very close relationships with my patients, and some of them have my direct number, which it's just something that I've established over time. It's not necessarily what's recommended. It's not necessarily like what's in practice regularly. So if you don't have that option, I think what you need to do is really make great friends with your nurse coordinator for the clinic, if you have a multidisciplinary clinic, because that nurse coordinator will act as an internal advocate for that clinic for you. Because oftentimes what ends up happening is like a lot of hospital systems have centralized their scheduling, and those central schedulers or those central message takers maybe given words that they're supposed to be communicating or have ideas about what they're communicating, and it's not really translating to what the physician wants to be saying or what the nurse coordinator wants to be saying. So trying to bypass that, or even just kind of being a squeaky wheel. I always encourage my patients that the squeaky wheel does get the oil. So be a squeaky wheel and say, I need to talk to my physician directly. I don't want to be talking to you. That's nothing bad. It's you're asking for something that's your right, and I would never feel ashamed or embarrassed to do that. And you have every right to ask for it. And I think what ends up happening is that you have a lot of mama bears and papa bears for little cubs as their children. So parents often advocate a lot for their kids, but then as patients transition to an adulthood and become more independent in scheduling their own appointments and following through, that mama bear, papa bear attitude isn't really there, but you have to kind of become your own fighting bear and really advocate for yourself and what you need, and never feel embarrassed about it or feel like you're imposing on anybody.
And I would just add that along with nurse care coordinators, social workers also fill that role of being able to kind of be kind of the glue with teams. At least in my experience, I was kind of able to get eyes on everything. I didn't even have to work with insurance, which honestly was just a load off my shoulders. So I could really focus on the communication parts of it. Didn't always know exactly what I was asking about, but just keeping the ball of communication rolling. Social workers are great for that too. Not available at every clinic, but also sometimes they're not always advertised. So I would encourage people to ask if there's a social worker, because you might have access to one, even though that's kind of not advertised up front.
Yeah. I want to hang with you for a second, Mark. In a previous conversation, you talked about the need for families to be able to be a family, to be a caregiver, to be a parent, and so on, which means all of this administrative, the bureaucratic arguing with insurance and all the different elements that I'm sure we've all experienced to one degree or another just makes life hard, but B, makes caregiving hard and being a parent hard. Is there anything you recommend for folks to do or be aware of for finding ways to navigate the monstrous system that is healthcare? That's a big question. Sorry.
Yeah, it is. I like big questions. I just can't promise I'll answer every single piece of it. When it comes to an elephant of a problem, I don't know if you've heard, like, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So I try to think of it in chunks. And one of the bigger points that I like to make, and it's definitely a mindset that I work with, is when it comes to transition, there's that medical piece. And I'm definitely a little biased as a social worker, but I think there's also an equally important, and sometimes more important, depending on the issue, social transition in the mix too. Because what that question included, and what I can imagine a lot of caregivers thinking, is those things are all going to be on me. Those things are all on me. Like, all of that weight is on my shoulders to deal with. And so really the general advice that will look different according to, what different people have access to would be find ways to unload that pressure where appropriate. And one part of that is some responsibilities and some of that pressure can be unloaded on, the person infected with DMD, because it's their care that's in play. And so it stands to reason that if they're able to have a voice, they should have a voice in that. So really the social piece of transition is it's a transition for parents too and caregivers. Like, it's not easy relinquishing responsibility for important things. But really what the sort of goal is handing off responsibility and having a parent caregiver go from a direct caregiver for everything to more of a coaching role and a cheerleading role. Because eventually there will be a mechanism built in to kind of self-advocate, to problem solve, and really be a partner and kind of collaboratively manage the care. And so then whenever those issues come up, you as a caregiver already have a partner in the person you're caring for. But then also finding people in the clinic to unload pressure to, social workers, again. I would try to always say, like, you don't have to find the answer to every single question, because that's ridiculous. There are so many questions you have to answer. And like, it was literally my job to find the answers on behalf of people. So I would always say, like, if you have a question, ask me to find the answer and give it to you. You don't have to just constantly spin your wheels to try to find it. So really just trying to push things that don't have to be on your plate onto others, and even just check too. I know in a previous conversation, we mentioned this kind of mindset too. I think it might have been Ken and Jake. You can just cold call and ask people questions and just check to see if they'll, do something for you, help you with something. Because really the worst case scenario is you'll get a no, and then you're in the same position. And so it's the status quo. But there's a possibility that you'll get some help, some pressure will be relieved, and you'll be able to focus on the other of the million fires you need to put out that day. I think that answered a decent amount, but I'm not sure if it answered everything.
Don't we all wish we had a Mark on our care team? Holy cow. Thank you, Mark. One of the things that you've said previously, and we wrote this down, I wanted to point it out, because it goes along with this mindset concept that you were talking about and asking for what you need. You said, assume that perfect care is possible and then aim for that. If you have that vision, what you think you need for perfect care, then you've got something to aim for, right? Is that kind of the concept?
Yeah, that's exactly the concept. And that's actually kind of something that the community and caregivers that I met with really taught me, that because something that they very often took pride in is just an inability to accept yes, or just never accepting no as an answer. And just really constantly thinking like, I want this, it should be possible. I will confirm that it's not possible, but I'm going to assume that it is. Because then you might be looking at chunk improvements, or you might learn that, I can have everything that I ever wanted. Whether that be finding a care center that's PPMD certified, and you have that multidisciplinary approach where everything's in one day rather than chunked up, like that does exist. And it's also possible to get there from places like Louisiana, which are more care desert spaces. And on that too, just kind of thinking quick fact-based kind of information. A lot of state Medicaid plans have something built in to help with travel. They're not all great. They're kind of clunky. Sometimes it takes somebody with the hospital to coordinate, but sometimes Medicaid can help with travel. And then shameless plug, Team Joseph, our Duchenne Family Assistance Program, also helps with travel to clinic spaces. And there are other places out there that want to help. So it really is a matter of finding them. And part of finding them is to assume that they're out there and just assume that you can get help.
Yeah.
I think that might have just repeated that and reiterated what you said. Your summary was great too.
No, it's wonderful. Thank you. Appreciate it. I kind of want to stick a little bit here with this mindset idea. Naz, you have mentioned that there's a different mindset. We were talking about, the transition between pediatric care and adult care. And you were saying that there's a difference in teams that are in pediatrics versus teams that are in adult care in general. I don't want to get you in trouble, but I do think it was an important point that you made that we should think about as we transition. And I realized I didn't end on a question, but maybe there's one in there somewhere.
I think I know what you're getting at. I think the field of pediatrics attracts a lot of people, like, as you can see, like a lot of us look like school teachers. We're very drawn to children. We're very coddling. We love taking care of people. And it's a very different atmosphere. I'm sure, like, if you've walked into a children's hospital and you see all the bright colors and the statues, and then you go to the adult side and it's like beige, gray, it's a very different mindset. I always thought, like, why can't the two be the same? Because every adult has always been a child. So why can't they merge and be happy? I think that's something that we have to aim to do and aim to expect from the adult side. But it's really interesting. There is a different cultural way of thinking between pediatric physicians and adult physicians. And even though I personally never want to let go of my patients as they age, the problem is that if I have an adult patient end up in the emergency room who gets hospitalized, if I have like a 30-year-old patient, they're not going to the peds hospital where they could see the peds cardiologist and the peds pulmonologist. They're ending up in the adult unit. And that's where we have to kind of work really hard as a community to kind of get everybody enthusiastic and motivated and in the mindset of really supporting our transitioning patients. But I don't know why this mindset kind of exists, but I think it's in all aspects, even in schooling, like the difference between elementary school teachers and college professors, it's there. So I think what ends up happening is in order to make that experience better for you, you on your own end have to try to put a little bit of work into it to enhance your experience and you just have to expect more, just as you were saying, like your expectations have to be exactly what you've been receiving. Don't resign yourself to being like, it's an adult situation. I'm not going to worry about it. They're not going to call me. I'm not going to care. That's not the right attitude to have. You can even write down a plan of what you're expecting and tell the physician about it. And I'll tell you, interestingly, physicians have support groups too. Like on Facebook, it's very interesting. So I'm part of like a really nice community called Women in Neurology. And my adult colleagues will often get notes from their patients, or even like, I'm not saying to buy gifts or anything, something emotional, like, thank you, doctor, this means something. And you'll see people who are often very rigid and kind of automated in the way that they're working through the day-to-day grind of seeing patients all of a sudden blossom and be like, my life was changed today. I got this letter from my patient. And I'm like, see, you guys there's still a lot of heart in there. And I think we could tap into that heart. You know, the heart's like out on your sleeve in peds, but I think on the adult side, they just have to crawl back in and grab it back out there and really feel it for you. And I think it's so easy with the Duchenne population because you guys have to realize that you are so special and you bring a lot more to the doctors than they're able to give to you. Just realize that you are a gift to them and you're offering them a lot. You're enhancing their lives in ways that you'd never imagine, enhancing the lives of everybody around you. So again, don't ever feel like a burden or anything like that. So just remember that you're bringing a lot to the table and advocate for yourself as much as possible for that experience that you want.
Speaking of that transition and advocating for yourself, let's kick it back to Anthony. You said you're 30 years old. I'm assuming that means you've somehow transitioned from being a kid to an adult and seemingly successful, right? You have a job, if you're on the panel here, you've been on several panels, you're very active in the community and lots of other areas of life. Can you tell us what was the transition like for you? Was it difficult or did it come somewhat natural? And either way, are there any tips you would give a family nearing that transition period?
Yeah, I would say it was pretty difficult. Like we had to really change all of our doctors and where we went. We used to go all the way to Delaware to DuPont Hospital. That's where we got a lot of the care, but then when I became an adult, we had to go all the way to Baltimore, which is even further away, in order to get the care that I needed. I think it probably took me until now to really like take hold of all of my care, and like my mom still does a ton, like it's almost a full-time job for her, but I try to take as much off of her plate as I can. I'm really lucky that I have a really good support group, and my mom and dad and nurses and caregivers and friends, like they are all helping me along the way. And I think like if you don't have that support, I think a lot of the advocacy and care work falls onto your lap. And I think it's really about slowly letting your child, as they grow older, like giving them more and more responsibilities in terms of their healthcare, and like not just like dumping it all on them all at once, because it's really hard to climb out of that mountain. I think it's all about easing that transition.
Sure. I think back to Mark's comment, right? One bite at a time of the elephant instead of putting the whole elephant right on the dinner plate by itself.
Yeah,
Jake,
and I'll also mention that in my experience, and I talked about transition and the handoff of responsibilities a lot. Just in my experience, I guess a first bite of the elephant that patients that I saw usually chose for themselves, this is like around 12 or 13, is just figure out a more active role in medication management. So some of them just had like, oh yeah, I'll start reminding you when I need to take meds, even if I still need your help to organize them, or maybe the organization part is what they wanted to start with. But those small chunks early on, that snowballs into a lot bigger abilities and self-confidence. So
Sure.
That's kind of another positive note too. Like, feels like this monumental task of transitioning, but you can still transition to an adult approach of care and really just an approach in general, and just start small. And you can start small, you can start at home, really you can start anywhere.
Jake and Ken, I want to give you a chance to really respond to the same inquiry. What was the transition period like for you? And looking back at what you lived through, are there things that you would recommend another family or individual be aware of as they approach their transition period?
Listening to what the doctor says. That's a big recommendation.
Yeah.
Is to always go the distance.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, it reminded back to early on with the different surgeries and spinal fusions and stuff that Jake went through, and Dr. Webster wanting Jake to get the proper equipment, standing wheelchair. He's still in a standing wheelchair today, so he's able to passively stand. And it's benefited him long run. His lungs, no decubitus. All of those fights have been incredible. Anthony, I so admire you. I think that for the longest time since Jake's had this, it's been myself, my wife, and I as a team. You know, you're independent. And I think with Jake, one of the things was the pandemic was a game changer for him. He would volunteer at the hospital where I retired from.
It's tough now. They did away with it.
Yeah, they took that away.
Because of the pandemic.
Yes. That was a big game changer for Jake. But I mean, he still trucks along every day, and whatever he asks, whatever we try, you know, we too are blessed with a great caregiver. We have a lady that comes in here 7 days a week for Jake and takes care of him and gets him up, and it gives Kelly and I a chance to maybe go out for a breakfast or something like that. But I mean, it's a total commitment. And I think, you know, I might be speaking out of term here, but I think a key component is faith. You have to have a strong faith. You have to have acceptance. You have to have a belief in God, and just know that, you're not given more than what you can handle. And Naz, I'm so grateful that to hear you give out your personal cell phone number. During the pandemic, Jake went into the hospital with an aspiration pneumonia. He was losing weight. He couldn't eat. So he needed to have a feeding tube. We tried to get him into Mass General. There was 70 people ahead of him. We couldn't get him out of a small hospital. Although his pulmonologist at the time was in Boston, I called him on the phone, only to find out a couple hours later he returned my call. He was in vacation in Italy. He called me back. I was so admired him. So we had to do what we could do on the local level at the hospital. They took the chance, put the feeding tube in. And I mean, he's been doing great with the feeding tube. But I mean, having the access, just about every one of Jake's doctors, we have their personal cell phone numbers. And that is a blessing to have that access from the pediatric side to the adult side. To have doctors willing to go the distance like that has been phenomenal.
Because in emergency situations, it's always key. Get in touch with who you need to.
Yeah. We've heard about a lot of challenges and triumphs. Trina, some of those challenges are not in the clinic. And sometimes they're maybe even a little bigger, societal or governmental. You talked about an issue that you took all the way to the governor. And so maybe explain that a little bit. Also, is there any advice that you would give to a patient or a carrier or a caregiver or a parent when they feel like there needs to be a little escalation on this particular issue, whatever they're dealing with?
Yeah, I would say don't give up. Like, I don't know the word no. If you tell me no, but this is something that my child needs, like, we're going to make sure it happens. Like when Austin was first diagnosed and we couldn't get him the proper care, and he had Medicaid, and they just did not want him to go out of state. They said, no, we have doctors here that know how to care for him. And I'm like, no, I promise you, we've tried. There are no doctors here that are specialized in Duchenne. So we need to get him to that. And they denied, we appealed, and we took it all the way up to the governor. And he finally said that Austin needed to go to Cincinnati Children's or a clinic like Cincinnati Children's that were able to give him the care that he needed. And that was a complete game changer for us. And I know a lot of families don't have that, but never be afraid to ask. If there is a roadblock in front of you, you have to push through it. It doesn't matter. They may not like you. You're not here to make friends. You're here to advocate for your child and get them the care that they need. So just sometimes you just have to bulldoze right through it and take it all the way to the top. And I would never apologize for trying to save my son.
Advocacy right there.
Any recommendations you would make for that family or for a female listening, where do they begin? If they're manifesting or they're starting, they're realizing they've got some symptoms or some concerns, where in the world do they start?
Well, let's start with pediatrics. So if you notice a daughter, because a lot of times, even if you have a family history, they don't recommend that you do genetic testing until they turn 18. That's a topic for another situation. But so if you notice that they're having muscle weakness or they're tired all the time, just bring it up to the pediatrician and say, hey, I'm noticing these issues. Can we at least do a CK? CKs don't always come back elevated, but if your daughter's coming back and her CK is elevated, there's a pretty good chance that she needs to have this genetic testing and it'll come back positive. And then you start with a neurologist. And in the younger ages, really a neurologist is where it's at. And then you slowly add as you need. You add the cardiologist, you add the pulmonologist, you go from there. Now, if you're an adult, you've run into a little bit of problems. Usually you go to your family doctor and you start telling them, hey, I'm tired, or I'm having trouble, I'm not able to run, or I used to be able to walk long distances or climb up and down stairs, and I'm really slowing down, or I'm noticing I'm really tired, I'm having trouble breathing, I feel some skip beats. So you start with your family doctor and you just try to convince them. They can't always be convinced. So then you show up with research. Say, hey, there was this study done at Nationwide Children's Hospital for female carriers, and it's saying that 40% of them are having cardiac issues, and an echo and an EKG may not be enough. Can we do a baseline MRI and then go from there? Or if you're having muscle weakness, your family doctor, you can ask them to refer you to a neurologist. Now, local care is really difficult because a lot of times they're unfamiliar with manifesting carriers. So you may have to try to seek out the care, the multidisciplinary care further away from you. So it's a lot to try to coordinate that. And it takes a lot of research to be able to find those clinics. And if there are families that are struggling to find these clinics right now or find these resources, they can always reach out to me and I will gladly point them in the right direction.
That's huge. Finding somebody who can be a cheerleader for you, and maybe somewhere along the way also a coach. Thank you.
So as we talk about mindset and advocating for yourself, we wanted to ask a question to the whole panel. Is there a mindset that you rely on when you're facing challenges accessing healthcare? And we'll start with Anthony.
Yeah, so my model that I live by is, despite my disability, my abilities have no bounds. So I know that I may not have the physical ability to do things, but I have the mental capacity and the resources and the ability to contact and communicate. So I know that I can find a way to get what I need. It's not all about your physical ability, that you have so many other abilities that you can use.
And Jake and Ken.
Well, it's kind of like Trina said, you just don't let anybody get in your way. If you have to, go right through, get people angry at you, then so be it. I mean, you are entitled to get the proper care for your child or for your young man. no matter what the bounds are, go through them, go around them, always do the best what you feel in your heart is right.
And for me, sometimes if something is too difficult, I try to use my faith to help me get through any situation that seems too tough, and that always helps.
Mark, can you share with us a mindset maybe that you have or you would encourage others to use?
Yeah, it's giving me a lot of thoughts, but I think I'm mostly circling around two. So for myself, and I kind of try to, I guess, talk about this or impart it to others too, and it's a reiteration of the kind of not accepting no as an answer or leading with yes. But I kind of fall back on the framework of is versus ought, where there is a way that things are, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they should be that way. So thinking about what ought to be the case and then working towards that, assuming that it's possible, really kind of helps you figure out what could be changed if you're able to take that kind of a change on. And then also helps you get a more firm understanding of like what the actual landscape is. Because another worry, especially with things like resources out there, Medicaid waiver is a big one. It can be really complicated to understand, and there's a lot of misinformation out there where again, it is the case, but it shouldn't be the case. Some people might just give you a wrong answer because it's easier for them to get through that moment rather than taking the time to really figure out what the answer is. So just kind of working with, I think that this should be the way things are, and so I'm going to base my actions off of that and just not accepting what is. And then the other part of that too is something that I definitely fall into this trap too, talking about transition, talking about changes. It can't be prescriptive for every single family. And so I usually try to mention or just talk about the fact that success doesn't have to look one specific way for anybody. I met with a lot of patients who now have jobs, who ended up going to college, but not everybody wants that. That's not an end goal for everybody. I can think of one person who just has like the time of his life with his parents, and they have really creative Halloween costumes, and he just likes being out in nature and works with the 3D printer. And that's what success looks like for him. Like, I would say that is a successful transition to an adult approach of, I guess, the world, because his voice is in there and he can kind of shape what engaging with the world looks like. So it's not always living independently, and just making sure that you don't get locked into one channel of what success or what good looks like, and just realizing that those values can be different for you, and that's okay.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Everyone is different, and everyone has the ability to define success the way they'd like it to be. I love that.
Yeah, and also a lot of people just have challenges that get in the way, and that's just true. I can't tell people what their challenges are. And nobody can tell you what your challenges are.
Trina, you talked about advocating for yourself and don't take no for an answer. Do you have anything else to add as far as mindset?
When facing a difficult situation, I like to tell myself, you always have three options. You can give up, you can give in, or you can give it all you got. And I always like to go in with giving it all that I have. I like to fix things. So if there's a problem in front of me, I can't just leave it unresolved. Like, I need to figure out a way around it and fix it. Whether that's trying to find doctors that are knowledgeable in carrier issues, or trying to get, my son to the clinic that he needed, or researching clinical trials that any one of us could benefit from. I just like to work it out, and I just don't know how to take no for an answer.
Yeah. I hear in there that a challenge is an opportunity to make a change. And I love that. It sounds like you seek challenges for those opportunities. Naz, can you share with us a mindset that you might suggest or that you think of when people are facing challenges in healthcare?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think we focus a lot on talking about going to like multidisciplinary centers and finding good providers. And obviously, you're lucky if you live next to one of these places. But one thing I wanted to say is that, God forbid something happens, your ambulance is going to take you to the closest hospital, right? So then you're at the mercy of those caregivers. And I think one of the other things that you should enter into is not seeking outside of your area, like the care that you need, but also educating, seeing yourself as an educator of those that are in your vicinity, because it's not only going to give back to you, but it'll give back to other folks in the area that have other neuromuscular conditions as well. So you can kind of give back to your community in that way by educating. I mean, that's obviously more work to add to your plate there, but if you find good providers, and I'm a big fan of like support groups that are local as well, so that you can kind of identify good providers who can be the people that you see, because this country is vast, right? So like the little nooks and crannies of where everybody needs care, it's going to be hard. But if you can take that step and pave that road in just that one little part, I think collectively it can make a really nice network. And I think working with a big multidisciplinary center can be really nice, because especially now with the electronic medical records, your local provider can see what the other provider is writing and actually be educated as a process of going through those notes and kind of knowing the plans and being prepared that, you know, if something did, God forbid, happen, like they are prepared to handle it locally. So that was one mindset, to see yourself as an educator and see that you are actually giving to the providers and you're not just asking for help. You're helping them a lot. And then the other thing is something that I always use when I ever face any kind of adversity or challenge, which is something that my mom always told me, which is if you have a river and you build a dam of rocks, if that river is raging enough, it will find a way around that dam. It will always go through. You can't stop it. So just, I would always say, be a raging river and do your best to kind of overcome that block. You'll always find a way. It's never black and white. You'll find a way.
I love that. Thank you. I know we want to save a little bit of time for a Q&A. So I've got one last question for everybody, as those listening and tuning in, you know, work up the courage or, you know, put their question together in just the right words. I would like to start with Trina on this question. We'll wrap up with this. You know, today's theme is all about breaking through the barriers and just addressing things head on. If you had to identify one barrier that you wish would change or improve or somehow get better, what would that be? What are you spending your advocacy energy on?
Trying to get access to care for carriers, or get pharmaceutical companies to have women participate in clinical trials, so we have access to the medications as well and the treatment options that are on the horizon. We currently don't have these things, and that's what we're pushing for. So those are definitely barriers that we're trying to cross right now.
For sure. Thank you. Hopefully, people are going to hear some of these loud and clear today, and we just start chipping away at some of the concerns that and the challenges we're up against. Anthony, I wanted to throw the same question your way. What would that one thing be?
For me, because I went to school for communication, I would say the biggest barrier is communication itself. And I think a great way to explain that is like kind of sharing a little bit of the story of how I got my feeding tube. So one of the first communication barriers that I noticed was right when I got to the hospital, to the emergency room. I had to wait 12 hours in my chair in order to get a bed, and then to find seemingly the only Hoyer lift in the entire hospital in order for me to get in bed and finally get some rest. Because remember, I had not eaten for 2 days, so I was really tired. And then, like, once I get into a bed and get a room, two things happen. Since it was COVID, they weren't going to let my parents stay with me, which, like, I can't be on my own. I can't call out for help. So, like, I need my parents there. So, like, when I wasn't feeling well, me and my parents had to fight for them to stay there. And then we also had to fight for them not to do what their normal protocol is to give oxygen and to use blood thinners, because those are, like, dangerous for me. So we always have to fight and tell people, like, no, I can't do that. And a lot of the times they'll be like, no, this is what we always do. And I have to explain, like, I am different. I need different care.
Yeah.
And then, like, I got home after the hospital, it took me 2 weeks to reach a doctor just to figure out how much water to have in a day. And then, like, getting my formula, that was a communication error because the provider of the formula, they couldn't reach my doctor, but they didn't let me know until a Friday. So I wasn't sure if I was going to get food that weekend.
Jeez.
And a lot of the times they blame it on lost faxes or that they weren't able to communicate with each other. So what I really wish is that, like, my chart is a great first step, but I think there's a lot more we could be doing to improve communication.
Sure.
I think I'm amazed that we still rely on fax machines. So we have the internet and we have all these other modern equipment. I wish doctors would communicate with each other better. I wish suppliers would communicate with doctors. And I just don't want to, I don't want to be the messenger anymore.
Yeah.
I want to be the one that advocates for my care, not the one that does the job of everybody else.
Sure. Not crossing the T's and dotting the I's. It's mind-blowing to me that we can put people in a space station for 6 months at a time or 3 years, and we have a hard time, getting the ER folks to talk to the PT folks or everybody in between. It's absolutely bizarre. So I'm with you on that one, Anthony. Thank you. Jake, if there was one thing you could change, what would that be?
I think more adult providers for Duchenne care, because it's not many. And maybe more clinical trials for kids my age. Okay.
Yeah, it does seem like all the time it's a fight. We recently went through, like what Anthony was saying, with the food and the supplies for the feeding tube. And the doctors have, a struggle because they have to set forth those orders. And it seems like it's always a fight. It's a communication problem. Like Anthony was saying, everything that we have in this day and age, trying to get proper communications between doctors. We have Epic systems, and we have, what's the other one that we have? MyChart. We have Epic and MyChart. To have those systems to be able to talk together and not always be a delay. It's like we're talking, necessary time here. It's very short-lived. We need to get this stuff pretty quickly. So I think, communications is really key.
Naz or Mark, I'll let you take your pick. From your perspective on the more, professional side, if you will, what is something you would like to see change in the world of healthcare or access to it?
I'm also fighting a reflex of wanting to echo everything that everybody else has already said because it's dead on. But thinking of something else, and this is also more of a social focus, which I can't help, but information access and really the pathways to that information, in particular, making helpful channels easier to find. Because we talk about how the community really wants to help others in it, that a lot of people have already gone through challenges that families will continue to go through. And so there are helpful people out there who know how to navigate those systems, and just trying, kind of putting effort into making those easier to find and just making sure that families kind of get swept up in that support a little bit easier. Because I've heard from quite a few families that sometimes it was just one key conversation that just unlocked so much information and knowledge and support that they never knew would have existed if they didn't just happen to talk to one person at the right time. So really minimizing the coincidence and making it a lot more purposeful, I guess, would be part of the goal. And by information too, I mean resources and how to get them, what medical care can look like, how to navigate it in particular, where you can unload those communication pieces on, and really just generally find those people whose wake you can kind of coast in to give you an easier ride. Because I think a lot of times we feel like we need to reinvent the wheel, but really maybe you can modify the wheel that somebody else has already made, or maybe there's just already a wheel that's made and you can just kind of take it and run with it. And kind of another piece of that too, I think, is with the advocacy, because getting transition programs built up and really pushing for change requires advocacy and just loud voices that are constantly working towards that. Advocacy is helped if it comes from a place of confidence, and confidence comes when you have firm ground to stand on, which sometimes is just, I know that what I know is correct. And so then I'm willing to fight and use that as a push-off point. So there's a lot buried in that, but I'd say information access.
Thank you. Naz, you get the final word on this one.
Thank you, Sean. Basically echoing everything about getting adult providers on board. I think, just even in discussions with this group who's been so lovely and inspiring, I think it's worth having a concerted effort to identify adult providers in every state. That's something that we can do as a group to actually start moving this ball forward. What you say about getting more adult patients in trials and carriers in trials, I think involving pharma, like in pharma, we have people in clinical development. That's me. We work with the team to write the trial, to design the trial. That's all. Obviously, a lot of stuff goes into that thinking process. It's not just my dream. You have to think about us as the architect in some ways, but at the same time, listening to your voices and hearing your concerns actually really influences the way we think about things. So I'm grateful to you for kind of telling me where your mindset's at, because it's going to influence how I make decisions moving forward. So I think having these continuous conversations with pharma is very helpful. And then the other thing I was going to say is that I think we also have to do a little bit of celebrating, because this is a problem we didn't have before, because we didn't have such a beautiful aging population of Duchenne patients. So I'm grateful to be facing these challenges right now, and grateful to be a part of kind of paving through them.
Well said. It's obvious we still have work to do. And our hope is that conversations like this one help keep us grounded and focused on what's ahead. We want to encourage everyone to celebrate the wins, as Naz says, along the way. Big or small, it doesn't matter. We're still breathing, so there's still work to do, still a contribution we can make. And as Trina said, I love the way you put it, Trina. Give it all you got. There's always something to fight for, and the world's going to be a better place if you can, hunker down, lock in, and give it everything you got for the benefit of you, your family, and those that will come years after you. Thank you again, panelists, for giving us a phenomenal conversation today. Thank you to Jett for hosting this event. We want to open the floor up to some Q&A, and I'll invite Alexa to come back.
Thank you guys so much. That was incredibly impactful and powerful. And having these conversations, like Naz said, are really crucial and important to making change and creating change, and finding the providers or identifying providers or educating adult providers on the importance of care in this community and transitioning, and having more care centers, having that transition program in place is important. Access to care for females, and recognizing that you have manifesting carriers, but you also have females that are diagnosed with Duchenne. While it's rare, is still a possibility. I appreciate all of you so much for sharing your experiences and being open and being honest, and sharing the experiences with the community and the knowledge with the community and in pharma and families, and giving that basis of hope, but also understanding of the challenges that we are currently facing. So like Kyle and Sean said, we will open it up to Q&A. Do any of the panelists have any questions for any of the other panelists?
I'd personally like to learn about people's hobbies. What do you like to do in your spare time?
Oh, well, I do have to say, I'm just going to do a plug for our Camp Connect program, because we will have a panel on bucket list items that people are doing in the neuromuscular community. We'll be talking about dating and relationships, independent living, hobbies, stuff like that. So tune in for that, because I think there's a lot of good information about that, but you guys feel free to answer. What is your favorite hobby? And then we'll wrap it up.
I drink a lot of wine. No, I'm sorry.
I like it, Sean. Honest.
Games. I love playing games. Game nights, cards, board games, anything like that with friends is always a good time.
I love riding my recumbent trike. I can't ride an upright bike, so I ride a trike that's got 3 wheels. It gives me lots of stability, and I love to just be on it all day.
Hobby is definitely music, like writing my own songs and video games, be it advocating for accessibility or just making my own game. That's my big hobby.
I like to bike ride when I can. It's something I don't get to do very often, but I do love to bike ride, like on the Cape Cod Canal. Keeps me healthy because Jake wants to keep me healthy. So, and whatever he likes to do, we have the simplest times, like going to a train. He's a train enthusiast. We like to watch trains. What else, Jake?
NASCAR.
Yeah, we love NASCAR.
Nice.
Yeah, yeah. Go up to the races in New Hampshire, stuff like that. So, yep.
Perfect.
This year, I picked up my fiance's hobby. She's been a birder for a long time. So now we go out on hikes specifically for birding, and maybe it's, again, the social worker in me, but there's a lot of mindfulness attached to it and a lot of grounding. And so it's just been really nice. And then I've kind of gotten interested in the photography element alongside that, which has been fun to explore.
Very nice. Trina?
I am a farmer. I have a whole farm of miniature animals, and it's basically turned into a zoo, and it keeps me really, really busy. And I also love to travel, which is kind of difficult if you're also a farmer.
And Naz, you got to give us yours as well.
Sure. Well, I like to garden, but I dream of being a farmer with miniature animals.
I love it.
I thought there was a Colin Farrell movie, oh my God, where he had a miniature horse or a miniature donkey. Did you see that? That he had as a pet in his house? It was hysterical. So I wish I can dream, but Trina, you're living that dream. Do you have a miniature donkey or a miniature horse?
I do. I have 2 miniature donkeys. So we have miniature donkeys. We have miniature sheep. I had miniature cows. We have miniature pigs. We have chickens and turkeys.
Oh my goodness. That's awesome.
And then we did have one question come in. What advice do you have for parents of young children with DMD for how to raise them to be strong advocates for themselves and to believe in their ability to achieve what they want in life? My son is 2. So I'm going to throw that to Trina and Jake. I'll have Trina go first.
From the beginning, when my son was first diagnosed, we kind of just did information in those spurts. Like as he was old enough to understand, we kind of did it in his language. But as he got older, we tried to start taking a step back and had the doctors like start addressing him. If we were in clinic, instead of them talking to us, we would try to get them to talk to my son. He didn't always appreciate it when he was younger, and he was like, I'm not doing this. But as he got older, he learned to be appreciative, and we tried to let him be in control of how his journey with Duchenne would go. Like let him make the decisions and see if he wanted to participate in clinical trials or take this medication, or we just let him try to be in control. And I know it's really difficult when your child is so little because you're the parent and you want to do everything. So I don't know. Did I answer the question?
I think so. Jake, what's your take? Ken, Jake.
Well, I think a big part early on was you just don't know much about Duchenne's. So to reach out, try to find all you can about how it's going to affect your child, and then really listen to what the doctors say in the pediatric side, because you're laying the foundation for when they become adults, whether it be a surgery, whether it be particular medical equipment, to listen to the physician and take that attitude to, like Trina said, bulldoze through everything and just keep plugging ahead.
And Anthony, I want to ask you your perspective. So as an adult living with Duchenne, how did your parents help you advocate for yourself? Because you are a very wonderful advocate for not only the community, but for yourself. Growing up, how did you feel your parents did that? And what would you have liked to see as well?
I would say, first off, I always saw my mom advocate for me all the time. Like, she was, like, I would never want to get into battle with her because she would always win. And she really was able to get what I need. But I would say, other than that, they just treated me like my brother, like my sister. They let me figure out what I wanted to do with my life. They kind of pushed me the same way they pushed my brother and sisters to succeed. So I think it's all about like not treating me differently.
We do have one question on Facebook. How do you bolster confidence in your children when they are transitioning, really becoming aware of their shortcomings, etc.? Middle school is a bear for us this year.
Middle school is hard. Like middle school is hard for, someone not facing the diagnosis like Duchenne. And when you add that into the mix, this is around the time where kids start noticing anyone who has differences. And if you're the child who has those differences, it gets really difficult. I know like Austin had a coping mechanism where he wore sunglasses and his sunglasses made him invisible, and he can participate in things more easily that way if he thought he was invisible and people weren't looking at him or staring at him. So I think around this age, they start figuring out coping mechanisms and how they're able to connect more with their peers. And as he got older, he did have more confidence. It's just something that took him time. And no matter what we did to try to encourage him by participating in different activities and stuff, he just needed time to be able to acclimate to the situation and kind of access everybody by being invisible, where he could access them and he didn't think they can access him. So that's just what he did, just try to help push them into trying to feel comfortable.
And I would add to that, like, getting involved in social activities and finding communities where you don't have to be invisible, where you're free to be visible, be that camp or other social activities at school. I think it's all about finding that community wherever you can.
I'm thinking about Jake's journey all through school and everything. Luckily, I mean, we would not be able to function. My wife, I have to tell you, she is definitely the driving force. She took the bull by the horns with any of his needs at school. And even there was one child in particular who was kind of bullying Jake a lot. And my wife went right in there and talked to the kid, and just in a very beautiful way, just explained Jake's muscles don't work like your muscles work. And that kid became one of Jake's best friends. And, and I will say too that, I'm kind of like the hands-on guy. I fix the stuff, the medical equipment. But when it comes to a lot of the other stuff, it's like the boys, and I don't know if you guys all notice this too, but it's the moms that have the soft spot with the kids with Duchenne's. I mean, I just can't explain it. I see it here all the time. It's, Jake is extremely attached to his mom and her with him. I mean, they just really click. So it's really, as a family unit, it's important to hit on all 8 cylinders.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys again so much. We will go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you again, Kyle and Sean, for being amazing facilitators as always. Thank you to our panelists again for sharing your experiences. For everybody listening, thank you for being here and taking your time to educate yourself and hopefully educate the community as well. We appreciate all of you, and we will see you soon. Have a good day, guys.
Thank you all.
Thank you for listening today. Please visit our show notes at twodisableddudes.com for easy links to the Jett Foundation, where you can see the many programs they offer and find a certified Duchenne Care Center. Today, our shared thank you note goes to the Jett Foundation, the advocates who participated in this virtual panel, and the many others who dedicate themselves to addressing the challenges in medical care for Duchenne muscular dystrophy. By coming together and sharing experiences, the DMD community is continuing to make progress in medical care. but clearly there is much more to be done. So, in honor of the leaders in the conversation today, we invite you to keep living with urgency. Thank you for listening to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast. This show is possible with your support. Visit twodisableddudes.com to donate.
Connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app.